This is the 8th in a series of videos on the subject of Configuration Management, or CM. Designed to provide a grounding in the subject and to allow those of you who are either about to start doing development or have recently started to understand what it's all about and how important it can be to projects. In our last video, we looked at the mechanics of building and releasing databases. In any documentation on processes, there is usually one or more appendices. So today we're going to have a look at some of the questions often asked about version management systems and how they should be used. A version management system, or VMS, is a code repository. Think of it like a library for code. New entries can be added to the library and existing entries can be checked out and updated before being checked back in again. However, if you look at any modern version management system, you'll see more than just code in there. One question that is often asked is, should we put documentation in the version management system? Well, let's look at what could happen if we don't. If your product has gone through a few release versions, you'll have documentation for each of those released versions. The documentation for version 2 is likely to be significantly different to that issued for version 1. You will also have different sets of documentation, one for users of the product, one for those supporting the product, and one for developers on the project. It really doesn't matter what form this documentation takes, as losing access to it will cause problems. At the very least, the documentation needs to be backed up. Let's assume that the server holding the support documentation fails. This would be a stress point for that team, as they would be attempting to support your product using only their memories of how the product functions. Without a backup, you would not be popular with the support manager. Linking a set of documentation with the version of the product it refers to is vital. So why not treat the documentation just like code? Over time, the documentation for a product will get updated. There will be revisions of that document, just like code. Being able to look back at previous revisions of a document is just as useful as it is for code. Especially where version 3 resurrects a feature that was deleted in version 2, but first existed in version 1 of the product. So yes, treat any sort of documentation as code that needs to be versioned and stored in the version management system. Another question that comes up often is, can we delete a revision of a file from the version management system? Consider your response when approached by one or more developers to ask that revision 1.2 of a particular file gets deleted from the VMS, as it was checked in by mistake or contains an error. As Configuration Manager, while you have the administration rights to delete revisions, should you? Such a deletion would be a permanent erasure of that revision, as if it never existed. If you did remove it, and then the developer came back later to say, sorry, I really meant revision 1.1 and not 1.2, can you restore it? This would cause you additional work trying to recreate that revision. Ideally, nothing should ever be removed or deleted from a VMS repository. The response should be, if revision 1.2 is wrong, then check it out, amend it, and check it back in as a new revision. Your repository is an audit trail and should accurately reflect everything that has ever been checked in. Disassociating a file from a build can also be an option. If the problem concerns a large number of files, where someone has made a complete mess of the files, you're much safer creating a branch or fork of the repository at a point before the problem and continuing development from that point onwards, leaving the problem file's revisions as an orphaned branch. For SQL script files, it's quite common to retire them if the SQL object is no longer to appear in the database. This can be done by simply amending the SQL creation script to hold a comment line saying the SQL object is retired, reference ABCD, where ABCD is the reference to the request for change ticket. The build process will not create the SQL object in the new database version, as the script only holds a comment, and the SQL compare tools will put a delete statement to remove the object from the production databases. Another question often asked is, what is the naming convention for files, folders, and branches within the version management system? This question is likely coming from a developer, which is a good sign that they are asking the question rather than developing their own convention. This naming convention should be covered in the developer's documentation for the project and will reflect your organization's approach to naming things. However, you may be starting a new project or be at the very early stages of your organization doing development. To be effective and useful, any naming convention has to meet a few key criteria. It has to be used consistently throughout the project by everyone. Names should be descriptive and meaningful. Don't call files things like Document 1 or Document 2. Ideally, avoid spaces in the names, as some systems can have issues with those. Put in an underline if a gap is needed. Avoid vague terms. Steer clear of special characters. Keep names concise while remaining informative. For branches in the code, you need to agree on a strict naming format that provides information on the purpose of the branch, ideally with the request for change reference included. Including this reference gives you somewhere to fully document the reason for the branch. For example, prod release version 1.6 RFC 1234 or prod patch version 1.6.1 RFC 1240. Your naming convention should also extend to the names for code and script files, as well as programming constructs within those files. Your SQL DBA will also be keen to have a good naming convention for columns within tables, as there is nothing worse than trying to work out what field 15 is for in a table. The last question for today is, what do we do when the users change the requirements at the very last moment? In development, this sort of thing happens on a regular basis, so much so that project managers tend to build contingency into project plans just to cater for it. Don't panic, this should be a business decision. If the changes are really important enough, then the time box or sprint you are working on will need to be either extended to allow for the extra work, pushing back the schedule, or something not yet started will need to be relegated to a later time box or sprint. On a practical level, this may involve branching the code in the version management system, just as you would for a patch to the product. These aren't all the queries you are likely to encounter as a configuration manager, but they may help you start off in your role. That's it for today. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching today's video. Please feel free to click on the link in the description below to discover more videos.